All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're embarking on what the source material calls an intellectual salvage mission. We're cracking open a forbidden text, diving into a really dark and obscure philosophy known as the Ledger of the Great Evening. And this is a big deal because we're looking at a worldview that was quite literally and intentionally erased from public consciousness.
And look, this isn't just about exploring some old story. This is an investigation. We're digging into a philosophy that was considered so challenging, so dangerous, that it had to be buried. It's a worldview that forces you into a direct encounter with some deeply uncomfortable truths about yourself, about progress, and about reality itself.
So, our story kicks off, as so many of these strange tales do, with the discovery of a text and its keeper, a truly enigmatic figure known only as the Soothsayer. Now, when you hear a title like Herald of Destruction, your mind probably jumps to fire and brimstone, right? But the Soothsayer doesn't bring that kind of ruin. No. He brings a revelation, a kind of philosophical destruction so profound that it just shatters the whole status quo of our everyday lives. This destruction he brings leads to something called the Great Evening, and it's not the end of the world, not an apocalypse. Think of it more like a final destination for spiritual development, a terminal state, a point of absolute spiritual stasis where the game of life as we've been playing it just ends. So get this. His mission isn't to raise the dead from their graves. It's actually way more unsettling. He wants to reanimate the living, all those people caught in the stagnation of the modern age, to force them to see that they've already reached a terminal state and didn't even know it. He's here to wake them up from a very comfortable slumber.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics here. What's the engine driving this whole forbidden power? Well, the mechanism is something the text calls Fichtean necromancy. At its very core is this idea from German idealism, but with a radical, dark twist. You've got the I, that's you, your consciousness, yourself, and it actively pushes against the not I, which is literally everything else, the world, your obstacles, all your challenges. In this system, your reality becomes a perfect mirror of your own will.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, right? Because this completely flips our whole idea of necromancy on its head. This isn't about reanimating corpses. It's about reanimating the will, the spirit. It's not a violation of the natural order. It's a revelation of a hidden spiritual order, one where the self is the absolute, undisputed center of everything. Just pause for a second and think about what this actually means. Every single struggle you face, every mountain you have to climb, is an obstacle constructed by you for you. The world outside isn't some separate thing. It's a training ground designed by what the text calls the frantic delirium of your own will. But, and this is a huge but, there's a really dark downside to mastering this. When the I becomes absolute, when everything out there is just a projection of what's in here, the world loses its own reality. It becomes flavorless, a tasteless broth, because nothing has any meaning outside of the self. And this is where we get this incredible, chilling image of the prison you've built for yourself. The philosophy describes this metaphorical city of ash hues. The floor is polished silver and it only reflects you. The ceiling is stagnant, the absolute limit of your own mind. There is no outside. You are trapped in a perfect, self-made hall of mirrors. So that's the crucial takeaway here. In this worldview, all that striving is circular. The triumph of reaching the peak is just an illusion, because the peak was just another reflection of the valley where you started. The entire struggle was just an internal battle with your own shadow.
So, how does this all play out in the real world? Well, the text lays out these, frankly, terrifying rituals performed by the Soothsayer in that city of ash hues. He seeks out this group he calls the long-tired, people who were just spiritually exhausted by the meaningless motion of modern life. But he's not offering them rest. He's offering them a terrible awakening, positioning himself as a kind of shadow savior. And its rites follow this really disturbing four-step process. First, he makes people confront the wax fruit of their lives, all those hollow achievements, that harvest of vanity. Then he reveals the internal cage they've been living in without even knowing it. This forces them to acknowledge the abyss, the deep void at their core. And finally, he guides them into what's called a great refusal, a total, complete rejection of that empty, meaningless existence.
And this is the final benediction of his ritual, if you can call it that. Once the I completely withdraws its projections from the world, all external value just collapses. What you thought was gold
is revealed to be worthless dross. The fire of your ambition, it's nothing but smoke.
Okay, this brings up a huge question. If this philosophy is so profound, the supposed revelation of a hidden spiritual order, then why? Why was it, as the source says, entirely erased from public consciousness?
Well, the short and not-so-sweet answer is it was suppressed, on purpose. The dominant institutions, the powers that be, found this knowledge to be way too dangerous, too inconvenient for the rest of us to have. See, our whole society, which the text brilliantly calls the marketplace of distractions, it runs on one central idea: linear progress. It sells us on constant motion, endless growth. But the Soothsayer's magic reveals that all this striving is just a frantic delirium, the eye fighting its own shadow in a loop that goes nowhere. And that right there is what the marketplace just can't tolerate. This direct, bone-chilling encounter with finality. It's a truth that stops you dead in your tracks, a terminal shudder that makes all the constant buying and selling and striving just seem completely absurd. This one idea, it's pure poison to the marketplace. Think about it. If the horizon isn't some destination you can eventually reach, but instead a circle that just brings you right back to yourself, the entire myth of progress collapses. And so, what happened? This entire worldview got shoved into the shadows. It was considered too powerful a threat to the established order, and so it became this forbidden legend, an unmoving shadow on the very edge of history. So our intellectual salvage mission is done. We've opened the ledger. But what now? What does this all mean for you, the person watching this, the companion, as the text would call you? You know, the real uncanny hook of this whole philosophy is that it speaks directly to anyone who already feels like the world has become that tasteless broth. It gives a name and a reason for that feeling of stagnation. It explains why all the old questions, all the old motivations, all the whys have just lost their power. And from this angle, the Soothsayer, he's not just some bad guy anymore, is he? His destructive revelation becomes a kind of beacon, a necessary catalyst for anyone who's brave enough to actually investigate the architecture of their own cage. So I want you to understand, the purpose of this forbidden knowledge isn't to protect you or give you some secret power. It's a revelation. That's it. It just forces you to see the void, to see the circular nature of your own reality, and then it leaves you with a choice, to walk your own tightrope over that abyss. And we end right back where we started, with that potent, unsettling thought. If the horizon is a circle, what does that really mean for our goals, our ambitions, and our entire understanding of ourselves? It's an unmoving shadow that once you've seen it is incredibly difficult to ignore.